Many Americans have been concerned to see the recent rise in gasoline prices here at home.
American drivers are facing a punishing reality at the pump.
We've been waiting here for about an hour and a half.
We blame Trump for this.
Gas prices spiked to $4 a gallon, a daily reminder of vanishing affordability. This immediate financial pain has triggered a massive shift in national sentiment. Today, 77% of Americans view the country's economic conditions as poor.
So, of course, damaging our economies.
The energy shock has severely damaged the incumbent administration. The president's net approval rating on inflation cratered to an all-time low of -33. This represents a historic reversal. President Trump's approval on the economy, previously his political strong suit, has plunged to a record low of just 31%. This dramatic shift raises a critical question. How did a once strong domestic economy and midterm outlook collapse so quickly? This sudden shift in American politics is rooted in a single geographic choke point thousands of miles away. The epicenter is the Strait of Hormuz. The waterway is currently closed due to the ongoing war in Iran. The scale of this choke point is staggering. Roughly 20% of the world's oil and gas typically flows through this single narrow passage. Active warfare in the region has brought maritime movement to a hard stop. Cutting off 1/5 of the global energy supply at a single point mathematically triggers an immediate global supply shock. Massive physical damage has been inflicted on regional energy infrastructure, including specialized liquefied natural gas facilities. The destruction is so comprehensive that repairs will take years, not months, to complete. Because this physical delivery system is broken, the global drop in energy supply will persist. These damaged logistics mean the inflation seen at American gas pumps cannot be quickly reversed. The administration's strategic narrative has now shifted. The government has signaled that reopening the strait is no longer an immediate priority. The economic consequence of this shift is clear. Without an immediate reopening effort, these inflated energy prices are locked in for the foreseeable future. For the American consumer, this ensures sustained inflation and stalled economic optimism for months to come. Political strategy is being adjusted to meet this pessimistic voter base ahead of the midterms. With the president's overall approval rating slumping, Democrats have become the odds-on favorites to sweep both the House and the Senate. In a globalized economy, the destruction of a single infrastructure choke point in the Middle East has the power to flip the balance of power in Washington. Pump, with gas prices blowing past $7 in several regions. To mitigate the spike, the government is executing a massive stopgap, the release of 400 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. This chart contrasts that domestic reserve against global demand. The Strait of Hormuz alone moves 20 million barrels daily, creating a continuous drain. The math suggests our emergency buffer will be exhausted by mid-April, failing to keep pace with the massive global deficit. This intervention functions as a temporary buffer, buying a few weeks of time while leaving the structural shortage unaddressed. Political leaders often claim that record-breaking domestic production provides a shield against global energy crises. That narrative of energy independence directly conflicts with the harsh financial reality for families currently struggling to afford fuel. If the United States is the top producer in the world, the domestic supply should theoretically be abundant and affordable. The problem stems from the private ownership of global commodities and the specific chemical requirements of our regional infrastructure. Using gross production numbers to define national security ignores the physical mechanics of how oil actually reaches the consumer. Wealthy private investors, rather than the American public, own the oil extracted within the United States. This chart shows that because oil is traded on a global market, the American benchmark surges right along with international price spikes. Domestic producers seek the highest international bidder, causing local consumers to absorb the price shock, even as corporate profit margins remain protected. High production levels ensure corporate stability, but they offer very little actual protection for the average driver at the pump. In the American Midwest, the crisis takes a physical form. Refineries in places like Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio form the backbone of the region's manufacturing economy. These facilities were engineered with one constraint: they are only configured to process heavy crude oil. Most modern American energy production, particularly coming out of Texas, yields light sweet crude, which these Midwestern refineries simply cannot accept. Swapping these fuel types would require a complete multi-billion-dollar overhaul of the region's industrial infrastructure. Consequently, the record-breaking oil volumes produced in the American South are physically incompatible with the needs of the manufacturing heartland. The domestic oil surplus remains trapped by a hardwired mismatch in our refinery network. The Midwest relies on the heavy crude produced in Alberta, Canada, to bridge this supply gap. The Enbridge mainline pipeline serves as the primary artery connecting this Canadian supply to American refineries. This map of the Enbridge network reveals its scale. The pipeline supplies 63% of the crude oil required by the Midwest. Every day, 3 million barrels of Canadian oil pump into the U.S. heartland to keep American manufacturing alive. While trade policy focuses on tariffs and rhetoric, Canada has established a physical monopoly over the American industrial base. Canada is already exporting 890,000 barrels a day to the Asian market, confirming they have viable alternatives to the American consumer. This dependency creates a deadline. The USMCA negotiations begin in exactly 86 days. The president enters these talks with a 35% approval rating and a critical need to secure the region's energy supply. This political instability contrasts with the absolute physical necessity of Canadian crude for the American Midwest. These negotiations will be defined by the physical location of the pipelines and the specific chemistry of the refineries, regardless of the political narrative used in the room.
In recent polling, Americans are describing basic trips to the grocery store as ridiculous. Many families explicitly report feeling poor because the cost of everyday life has outpaced their earnings. This growing national sentiment of feeling poor is primarily being driven by a sudden and severe energy shock. This shock acts as a regressive tax. Middle-class families must spend a significantly higher percentage of their total income on essentials like gas, heating, and groceries than the wealthy do. As costs rise, it aggressively shrinks their remaining disposable income. This energy shock is an unavoidable mechanism that strips wealth directly from these households. Historically, the federal government has used its resources to subsidize the middle class during these types of economic shocks to protect their standard of living. But the United States has severely depleted its wealth over the last few decades, as shown by this decline in available national reserves. Because the Treasury is depleted, the government lacks the financial ammunition to provide meaningful economic relief to families during this crisis. This raises a central question. If the government is too broke to help the middle class survive this squeeze, how is it choosing to allocate its remaining wealth? To combat this inflation, global financial markets expect central banks to hike interest rates, which typically cools the economy and slows price increases. President Trump is criticizing this approach, demanding that the Federal Reserve slash interest rates to 1%. He argues that current rates are costing the country between $600 billion and $900 billion a year in borrowing costs. Slashing rates increases the amount of money circulating in the economy. During a supply-side crisis, where there simply isn't enough energy or food to meet demand, lowering rates encourages more spending without fixing the shortage, driving the price of those scarce goods even higher. By prioritizing the government's own borrowing costs over aggressive inflation fighting, the administration risks prolonging the loss of purchasing power for the American consumer. Rather than domestic economic relief, the White House has pivoted toward a different fiscal priority. The administration requested a $1.5 trillion defense budget for the 2027 fiscal year, the highest in modern history. To fund this military expansion while the Treasury is depleted, the administration is making a specific trade-off. The president stated that the government can't take care of daycare, signaling a move to cut federal safety nets. The administration argues Medicare and Medicaid should be pushed to the state level so the federal government can focus its remaining funds on military protection. The federal government is effectively balancing its military ambitions by liquidating social support structures. These combined forces create a systemic pressure on the American public. From the bottom, the regressive tax of energy inflation drains household bank accounts to pay for basic survival. From the top, the federal government is stripping away support and purchasing power to fund record-breaking military spending. While the middle class loses ground, the asset-rich are seeing their net worth grow. Because they own the commodities, the oil, gas, and food sources,
The same price spikes that hurt consumers are captured as profits by those holding the assets. The everyday American middle class is being rapidly dispossessed of its purchasing power, resulting in a massive, large-scale transfer of wealth.
The administration points to $88 billion in tariff revenue to claim the greatest economy in history. Looking only at Wall Street, that claim seems supported. Despite a major global war, the stock market has dipped only 6% since the start of the conflict. However, that stability is missing on Main Street. While the market remains buoyant, 77% of Americans describe current economic conditions as poor, leading to a record-low 31% approval rating for the president's handling of the economy. This creates a difficult question. How can financial models and government reports tell a story of success while the public reports severe financial strain? The gap exists because Wall Street and the White House build projections on optimistic scenarios, while the consumers who drive the economy have hit a financial ceiling. The current market stability relies on institutional investors who are using highly specific predictive models to justify their positions. These models assume the U.S. military will end the war quickly and that the Strait of Hormuz will reopen within weeks. That entire outlook depends on a narrow window that closes in mid-April. If the strait remains blocked past that date, the assumptions holding the market together will fail, likely triggering a significant downturn. Investors are currently exposed to a crash because they are betting on a military timeline that is becoming increasingly unlikely. While the markets wait for a military resolution, the White House is doubling down on a protectionist economic agenda. The administration maintains that their tariffs are a success, bringing in billions in revenue without contributing to inflation. In practice, these import tariffs function as hidden taxes, with the extra costs passed directly to buyers at the register. The pressure on the consumer is set to increase further, with a proposed 100% tariff on brand-name pharmaceuticals. These domestic policy costs are compounding with war-driven surges in the price of crude oil and agricultural fertilizer. When import tariffs and pharmaceutical taxes meet rising energy costs, they create the specific conditions for stagflation. This combination of stagnant growth and rising prices creates a trap that erodes the purchasing power of the working class. By focusing on top-level revenue, the administration is pursuing a strategy that weakens the very consumers needed to keep the economy moving. Because the administration is attempting to sell revenue figures to a public struggling with grocery and gas bills, they have lost the narrative on the economy. Messaging about military victories and tariff collections does not resonate with households that are hitting a financial brick wall. The disconnect between official claims and household reality is now manifesting as a major shift in political alignment. With 3/4 of the country reporting poor economic conditions, Democrats have become the favorites to win control of both the House and the Senate in the upcoming midterms. A consumer-driven economy depends on the ability of the public to spend, and right now, that ability is exhausted. The mid-April deadline for the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz is acting as a clock for the current market optimism. As that timeline expires and the reality of stagflation persists, the tension between market delusion and protectionist policy will reach a breaking point.